Hello and welcome to Guide Talks, and today I'm delighted to have with me the wonderful Jane Piper from Pipsy. Jane is a psychologist, organisational psychologist. But rather than me
That's
steal
right.
your thunder, Jane, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience for those who aren't quite sure who you are or what you're known for?
Yes, well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, so I am an organizational psychologist, which, yes, is possibly something that not everybody has heard of. It basically is around businesses and people and how we make them work together effectively. So sometimes it's about changing organizations, and sometimes it's about the behavior and mindset of people inside the organizations. So the work I do is around coaching and consulting professional people who are usually working in the knowledge sector, meaning that they use their brains to produce results rather than their hands. So the sorts of creativity, innovation, and ideas that perhaps you would expect to see in a
Yep.
agency. And helping those people and the organisations they work in to actually get the best out of people and our brain power so that we can come up with new ideas, solve problems, use our emotional intelligence, and basically enjoy our life and work more.
Wow, that's a big ask, isn't it?
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and
I could have put it perhaps shorter as I just try and make work not suck
I think
as
work not
much.
suckers. Well, that's really interesting because our audience, agency owners, leaders, founders are well. One, most of them are kind of what I would call a reluctant entrepreneur. In other words, there's one of me, there's five of me, there's
Right.
10. Oh my word, I'm running a business. How does that happen? But also there's, I mean, there's
Yes.
just so much. There is so much. Seems to be so much stress. I was reading an article this morning about to-do lists and how to-do lists
Hmm.
are entirely up, which I believe I don't use them, are entirely upside down, and you should be block booking your time on major pieces, doing deep work on one thing, then deep work on another. And yet everyone ends up with Asana or to-do lists or Todoist or whatever it is, just going bonkers. Not enough hours in the time. If I only had another hour, if I could, if I, what's the? I mean, is it right that people are kind of almost like hardwired that they have to think they have to be working? Why can't people take Fridays off? I mean, answer any of that wherever you want to start.
Any of those questions? Well, it was interesting because, the 4-day week campaign is a very interesting one. In large companies, certainly there is a lot of time which is wasted, answering emails, going to meetings where you're not supposed to be there. And really, if we were braver and we're able to say, this has got nothing to do with me, we're not achieving anything, we probably could take every Friday off. And it was an interesting study that was done in a company in New Zealand, and they basically gave people that. They said, if you can get your work done in 4 days, then you can have the fifth day off, but you tell us how you're going to make your work more efficient. And so they were an organization sort of in the semi-legal insurance field that did trusts and things. Most of the teams managed to find ways to do that, but they did need to be a lot more focused when they were actually at work and just focus on the things that they needed to get done, um, and look at improving systems and processes. Definitely, when it comes to creativity, if you think about it, it's got nothing to do with the time. If you want your people to come up with, the most interesting, exciting, innovative campaign, asking them to sit at the desk for another hour is probably not going to do it. So it is about having the time off to be able to switch off from work and actually not be thinking about it. And when you are not thinking about it, then you probably are more likely to find some connections or find some way of bringing together some creative ideas, which would be a little
Well,
different.
I mean,
Um,
I tried to not work Fridays. I tried to do a 4 day week. But
mhm,
my thinking is slightly different because this is more in line with Cal Newport, who wrote the book Deep Work, which is So I don't work on Fridays.
Yeah.
So what do I do on Fridays? I go swimming, I go running, I paint stuff, I play guitar, I
Mm.
walk the dog. But all the time, my brain is pounding away, and I never had a great idea in front of a computer. So I come
Mm.
back on Monday with more better ideas, more succinct, better formed, better articulated as a result of not working on the Friday. That's my first point. And the second
Mm.
point is it's every Thursday is a bit like the day before you go on holiday, where you kind of you got lots of stuff to do. And my third point
Yeah.
is that to do a 4 day week, you just need to do efficiently like 15% more stuff each day. So it doesn't
Yeah.
it feels like we confuse um, the number of hours we're selling with the quality of our outputs.
Certainly in professions where you're used to billable hours, there is a bit where it may not, depending on whether your client's prepared to pay for it or not, may not encourage you to actually become more efficient. Um, Whereas, the motivation for those people in the company in New Zealand was, if you become more efficient and able to focus and get the same amount of that grind work done, you can have the extra day off. Um, and so I agree with you totally that the time that you take off, the brain's not asleep. And there is unconsciously, even if you're not consciously thinking about it, unconsciously, those sorts of ideas will keep filtering away. So, in a creative sector, that is important. And so, Elon Musk said the other week that, to be a great entrepreneur, he works 100 hours a week and, take that on his maths on it. He's basically, most entrepreneurs are working 40 hours a week. So he's working, 1.5 times. So he's going to get ahead 1.5 times faster than others, which I just don't believe in his equation makes sense at all. Um, because, to do the 100 hours a week, then you're sacrificing everything else, your well-being, any of that fitness you were talking about, going for your swim, any of your activities which recharge your sort of brain and the way you were thinking, you're painting, you're playing the guitar, that, they shift you out of one way of thinking and shift you into another way of thinking. It's probably no surprise that Elon Musk doesn't have a very good family life. And those are the things just being totally driven and focused on one thing works for a small group of people, um, and is somehow, however, held up there as a hero worship, which I'm not sure is a great thing either, because we all look at Silicon Valley and we all look at the Elon Musks and say, aren't they doing well? But they are unusual people, let's put it that way. And they have a driving ambition to do something rather than be known at the end of their life for also having been a good dad or a good mum, or having also been a good parent, a good daughter or son, and also having done other things in their lives than just work, work, work.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I have real problems with the stereotypes of the excellent hero entrepreneur. This kind of hero
Mm,
idea that they sacrifice everything for the love of the purpose of the passion, and then there's a whole load of, we might as well mention Simon Sinek nonsense about purpose, that people have kind of got wrapped up in thinking their business needs to have a purpose and their life needs to have a purpose and everything has to have a purpose. I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying that I've met too many people thinking, what is my
mm,
business's purpose? Well, it's to do great work with great people, isn't it? Yeah, but there must be more to it than that. And have a good time. That's okay. That's fine.
mm.
And I think also that kind of history is written by the winners. So
Mm,
you look at the graveyard of ambition where people's businesses have gone pop. Their businesses are normally their business strategy. Great people, great strategy, great positioning, great brand, is 9 times out of 10 identical to the winners. But the winners, for some reason, because of a stroke
Mm.
of luck, stand up saying, "Look at me, I'm a winner, aren't I great? This is how you've got to do it. Read my book on how I did it, the whatever your name is way."
Hmm.
And then people start believing that unless they're working 100 hours, unless they're driven, unless they got 87 things on their to-do list, unless that they're not whole people. And yet, it's as you were saying, like, how many people say, "I wish I spent more time in the office" when they're on their deathbed? It kind of feels like it's
Mm.
odd.
Yeah. And time was never a useful metric, really, when you come with creative or knowledge-based industries, because, as we're saying, the ideas or the solutions to problems don't come with more time staring at a computer screen. So the time metric was only useful in an industrial age. So, the reality is you're not that productive. And I think the challenge is, as an entrepreneur, is really trying to say, what are the most important things I need to do on my to-do list? What are the things I can delegate to somebody else? What is some of the rubbish that we just probably do because we feel like we should do, that you probably have more freedom as an entrepreneur to basically say that I'm not going to bother doing that anymore. Um, and yeah, try and I think there's a lot also, as you say, um, people are sold a solution, become a six-figure, entrepreneur overnight and this and this. And I think it's very easy to be, yeah, it's very easy to say my way is the best way. But I think often the way is you need to look for more patterns than looking at one person's success. One person's success, what might work for Elon Musk, because he's a very special person. But are there 200 of those sort of people out there in the world? Maybe 200, but there's
Yeah.
not 2,000, there's not 2 million of them. So, what are the patterns of success? And if we look for those common patterns of success rather than looking for the guru that it worked for them when they're quite a unique person.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's again, it's this thing about they are. It's not just that they're in the top 10% or even the top 1%. They're in the
Mm,
top 0.0000001%, and and
mm,
it's like a newt is not a baby alligator. In other words, in other words, um, you know, there isn't a natural logic that an independent, a one person business then a small business inevitably has to end up looking like Elon Musk. There are,
mm,
and in fact, if you want to know what, as the joke goes, if you want to know what God thinks about money, look at the people He gives it to. I mean, I think, I think there's kind of, yeah, what you were saying. There's something in it
yeah.
about, yeah. Everyone says I want to sell. From we were at this conference in Slovenia, and all the agency owners are going, "Yeah, 3 years time, I want to sell for X million, blah 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 blah." But 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 do you really? Do you really want to sell for millions? What
Mm,
will you do? Suddenly all those things that are precious to you are no longer precious because for me, it's things which are rationed, things which are scarce, which have value, and one of those is time. So take away that scarcity.
mm,
Yeah, a month holiday, perfect. 6 weeks, fantastic. 6 months, I think I'd go
mm.
bonkers. So is
Yeah.
that something in the
Yeah.
is that because we is all this thing around work ethic, is that a kind of a cultural norm thing, or
Mm.
is it about how our families have been brought up, or is it a class thing? Where does that kind of obsessive puritanical work ethic come from? So I'm not meaning to feed words into it. Where does that
Well, I
come
mean,
from?
yeah, I think if, s- I mean, in the psychology world, we do talk about the Protestant work ethic, of working hard, it was close to godliness, and that's definitely a cultural value which is passed down in many cultures as well, however, is the strong in the Christian culture. and that value, so transcends just, even if people aren't in that religious mode, definitely transcends that, and keeping track of time. For example, I live in Zurich, Switzerland, and a bell rings every 15 minutes to remind me that, time is ticking and moving on. And it's it's definitely part of our psyche. Uh, and a few people have challenged this from time to time and sort of said, you can, work the 4 hour day or something. Tim Ferriss and talked about some of that, but that tends to at times come into, it's a way of making money, so you work less, rather than us rethinking the logic of what we actually want out of our life, and what we're prepared to prioritize. Because um, we always, yeah, there is definitely a striving bred into many people to keep working and to keep working hard, and that will lead to some success. Which is a little different than in some Eastern philosophies, which is, the road to enlightenment is obviously to spend less time working and more time meditating. And so, the road to, certainly there's a strong cultural feeling in many cultures too, that hard work will eventually pay off and you'll get rewarded. Whereas in the world we live in today, um, bright thoughts and smart ideas are probably more likely to actually get it than the time you spend working.
And how does that kind of connect in with, because everyone everyone talks about, your business culture. Culture eats strategy for
Mm,
breakfast. We are
mm,
our people. Um, People are our most valuable asset. And then we kind of mistake culture for bean bags and beer on a Friday night. But everyone's, I mean,
yeah.
every agency founder is on the one hand trying to create a great workplace, but also
Hmm.
do great work. I mean, how does is that culture in your mind? Is that culture a top down or a bottom up, or I mean, how does that culture emerge?
Culture has to be both. I mean, you can't impose a culture onto people, because culture is, in effect, the way we do things around here. So the other people have to be able, the people, the followers have to be also their part of it. So culture comes both top down and bottom up. So managing culture, it's more like surfing a wave, if you're trying to manage culture. But I think one of the things, because we could talk about culture for hours, one of the things I've really learned, and perhaps a really practical tip for um, the, uh, the listeners to this show, is to think that the leader can definitely demonstrate culture in so many ways, and often that is underestimated. So when I've worked in organizations and we were trying to encourage well-being, a lot of time well-being wasn't talked about. So we said it's time to make sure the managers are actually talking about their own well-being. One of the things that was prior to the pandemic was leave loudly. I'm going home now to take my son to soccer, or whatever the case may be, to show that it was acceptable for the managers, and that created a role model, so that it creates also the permission for other people. You know, um, if the manager was to do that and say, "And you stay here and do all the work, please," I mean, that's different. But basically creating that culture where it is seen that people value their well-being and are not just working ridiculous hours. On the other hand, I've heard of culture. I mean, Zurich is a banker's town, and it was a bank that when somebody would leave at 7 o'clock at night, the boss would say, "You're doing a half day today," and would tell people off who hadn't answered the phone at 9 p.m., who had their phone switched off because they were at the theatre or something.
Mm-hmm.
So they were, the expectations that were set in some of those workplaces, and considered just what you earned the big bucks for. If you wanted huge banker's bonus, then you did that sort of work or work those sorts of hours. So it's an interesting, as we go back to, what comes from the society's culture, that this is this impression that hard work will get you further, which may not be right in a society where machines are going to take over doing donkey's work, or drudgery work. So where we're going to add value is on the thinking work, and thinking, actually people think better when they have had time to rest. So there's that culture, but then there's also the culture which is created within the organization itself, that if the manager is not role modeling that him or herself, then people will think their way of getting to the top is also to work long hours.
So what's your messaging to people in terms of and around productivity? Because we all want to have a higher output. We all want to be able
Hmm.
to 80/20 it, to nail it, to
Hmm.
add significant value. So
Hmm.
how? I mean, what's the is there a model? Is there a shape? Is there a kind of a recommendation or how
Yeah.
to?
Yeah. So it's about working less and prioritizing, and thinking more. And so there's a number of uh, suggestions or tips that I do that. But basically, if we start with on one side, it's a model which has sort of got four quadrants in it, and you've got the motivation. So you've got to be motivated. So you talked about having a purpose, but let's call it motivation. You've got to be motivated. If you're not motivated towards it, and then once you're motivated, you also have to be able to focus in on what you do. And that means that you have to be not distracted, and that you actually have time to get that work done that you're motivated to do. So it requires those two things to happen simultaneously. And then when it doesn't happen, like, okay, you've got work to do, you're not distracted, but you're not very motivated. Well, you can do it, but it just doesn't really flow. Or vice versa, you're very motivated, but you can't find the time block to do it. So one of the ones I look at is basically, I call it don't be daft, which means deal with your distractions, avoid all the multitasking, find what you really need to focus on and you're really motivated to do, and block out your time to be able to do it. And that, I believe, is the way that you can be productive. You've dealt with the distractions, you've stopped shifting from one thing to another, you know what you want to do that has to be done, that's actually going to achieve some value, and you want to do that, and you've got now the time block to be able to do it. So,
So I guess that most people listening, watching, would be saying, no, there's no. It's like people know what to do, they know the why,
mm,
and they know what to do because they can just
hmm
Google it. I want to put up prices. I want to recruit more people. I want to do a better campaign. They know the what to do, but somehow it seems that in my mind, it seems like the reptile brain, which is basically going. So I'm not the psychologist here, so apologies. But in my in my understanding, the reptile brain goes: is it dangerous? Yes or no? No. Is it interesting? It's quite interesting. So they don't actually do a lot of the stuff. People don't actually do a lot of stuff. They kind of what I should be doing, like the dull, boring stuff. Like they tend to do the stuff which they think is a bit sexy and think is a bit interesting and that. But some of the actual donkey's work, as you said earlier on, some of the stuff the hard lifting, you know, like what really is our strategy? How are we really different from our competitors? This is stuff where you've actually got to dig deep. They
mm,
it's easier to bang out some emails, or it's easier to talk about arranging the conference.
mm,
So again, I guess it goes back to
yeah,
Cal Newport stuff. The deep, hard thinking, I think people
mm,
often avoid doing.
Mm. It is easy, and that's where the distractions and the multitasking. It's easy to avoid and keep yourself busy, and then feel that you're busy, and that makes you feel okay. You get to the end of the day, oh, I was very busy, but you haven't actually done any of those things that have added value. So that's the F, find what are you focusing on and what motivates you, and do that. Delegate the stuff that you don't or interested in to somebody else. If you don't really like doing strategy work, we'll find somebody who does. There are people that really get excited about it. But it is definitely very easy to get into a trap of jumping from one thing to another, and it's to get into a mode where the brain stops thinking, if you know what I mean, in that deep way, because we're so often just doing that quick scrolling through multiple tasks all at one time rather than concentrating in on one thing.
And
So,
and
um,
and I'm wondering if people are thinking that's kind of realistic, because like, God, Jane doesn't understand. The phone's ringing, emails are coming in, the Slack chat's going. I've got
yeah,
15 people in an office over there. I've got 3 projects which need to be completed by the end of this week. And she's saying, she's saying,
yeah.
focus and slow down and concentrate. Yeah,
Relax.
take a
What's this
chill
lady
pill.
smoking? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the question is how you have organized it so that you actually do have time to do those things. And, there's been the saying, which I'm sure you said, work on the business as well as in the business. Because if you are just jumping from one thing to the other, always having to manage at a crisis and fight a fire, then there is something fundamentally wrong. So there's the one bit where you can say, yes, as people, we feel very important if we leap in to solve every crisis on behalf of everybody else. But how will the person that you've hired to actually really do that crisis ever learn? So a lot of entrepreneurs, it is a challenge, including for myself. Where do you learn to delegate, and how do you learn to delegate, and how do you delegate back to people? Because you probably can do everything, but where are you really adding the value, and seeing the question there? Should it be that you come up with the most creative campaigns because you really were the most creative person and that's how you ended up in your business? Or hire yourself a great operations manager where he or she can just basically keep all those processes running from, uh, you know, everything from hiring new people to
Yeah.
um, making sure the bills are going out. If you're the best in the creative world, then hire a salesperson. If you were the best with the customers, then go out there and be the salesperson and hire some creative team behind you. So you need to find a way of basically not being the center linchpin in solving every crisis. And it's easy as an entrepreneur to get like that because it feels very, you are right in the center of it, and it feels like you're doing the right thing.
But that's so what happens is we put on our Batman cape and we rescue everyone,
Exactly.
because we're so much better than everyone
Superhero,
else.
become
Because
and rescue it.
what would they have done if I
Yeah,
wasn't here? And as a result,
yeah,
everyone kind of steps back away from you. Go, "Oh, well, there's no point doing anything."
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I remember
yeah, yeah,
there was a
exactly.
thing with the body shop, which was like, when Anita Roddick was around, no one did anything because it was bound to be wrong. Because she'd look over you and say, "Why don't
Mm,
you do that? Why don't you do this?" And as a result, they would literally fold their arms, knowing that they were going to be wrong, knowing that so we're going to get cuffed over the head for being wrong. So just let her do her
mm,
worst. And I think that we,
mm,
I guess part of the problem when we run our own business, there's no, there's no, never mind double feedback loop. There's no single feedback loop. It's Heisenberg's
mm,
uncertainty principle. What we see how people react to us, if that makes sense. Like, but
mm, mm,
we don't see the kind of why they're reacting that way. So everyone's really nice to me, making me cups of coffee. Is that because I'm a nice person, or is that because they're frightened of my bad temper? So so there's a
mm,
really
mm,
weird dynamic going on that and I think what happens is that our the worst side of us kind of gets fed back to us, like because everyone else kind of accommodates you being bad tempered or bad at making decisions or impetuous or unreliable or
Yeah,
whatever all those
yeah, the people,
are.
yeah. Mm,
So
mm,
there's no one to say, have you ever thought about the way you talk to these people that maybe that might upset them,
mm.
or have you ever thought about the fact that you're not giving people any clarity about what you want, so they feel they're bound to fail. So there's something there about needing
Mm.
that feedback coming back in, I guess.
Yeah, and it's very true. I mean, corporate environments do have those feedback loops. I don't think they're very effective, but they do have something in there which basically looks at that in a lot of structures and processes which give clarity and things. What they do tend to miss, however, is the human aspect, and that's why people
Yeah.
enjoy working for smaller organizations because it has the human aspect, but then perhaps it doesn't have the clarity, and then you deal with the idiosyncrasies of a boss where the corners haven't been rubbed off him or her as they would be in a corporate environment where
Mm,
you had some sort of feedback. Um, Suggesting they improve. I think the answer to that is really to make sure that you create an environment where people can give you honest and open feedback and to invest in developing yourself. And that doesn't mean technical self, but the human side of the self, and so that means that you're investing the time through a coach or through a business advisor to actually start looking at how you do things and questioning things, which is why I think there is such a popular market out there for entrepreneurs of mastermind groups and all these sorts of things because they are needed in this space where in a corporate environment there would be already a set of rules and there would already be some ways of behaving and things. I certainly have seen in smaller
mm,
places, let's take bad behavior for example, in entrepreneurial sides, people being screamed at and yelled at, that would not be tolerated these days in most corporate environments, if you know what I mean. It's sort of behavior. And then on the other side, however, people loving to work for a small organization because they feel like a part of the family. And that may be a good thing, but maybe it's too much of a good thing. So, where do you create this distance without being in a corporate environment where it
I mean
seems
I mean that's
all anonymous and you're just a human
yeah. I
resource?
mean it's interesting you say that because we spend most of our time running mastermind groups, and it is literally
Mm,
people comparing notes, as in you do that, you do
mm,
well, we did this and that, and how much to do, and it's like this is where I am, and this is where I want to be, and this is what I want them to do in order to get from here to there. But how this is like, because there's no guidebook, there's no rule book, there's no management training,
mm.
there's no.
There isn't somebody saying, buy my 10 steps and you will be able to suddenly make yourself to be a multi-million-dollar agency overnight. If it was that simple,
Yeah,
and you could write it all in one book and watch a couple of
yeah,
videos, then,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
So the bit
everybody would be able to do it.
so the phrase you've mentioned several times, I'd just like to kind of work through a bit, is human to human in a digital world.
Hmm.
It's like
Hmm.
there's kind of like uh, I
Yeah.
I describe many of our audience as pointy headed, as in they are quite
Hmm.
techy. They
The,
they they think of things in
hmm.
terms of boxes. They use the kind of Larry logic, left hand side of the brain stuff quite often.
Mm.
So what does what does that phrase human to human in the digital world mean? What are the implications of it?
Yeah. To me, it means that we actually connect and value the human and humane ways of interacting, because so much of the way that we interact often is through the left hand logic side of the brain, as we say. But the people we're dealing with and the people you're communicating out to, if you were doing marketing in an audience, you're actually in the end communicating with their emotions. And it's the emotional side. And we tend to think decisions are all very rational, but most of the time we just use the rationality to hide the gut reaction that we would actually want, or the emotional reaction. So it's about recognizing that most of the time they are humans, and if we manage, we stop talking about managing and leading, we actually treat people like they are human beings, that have, you look puzzled then, that, they actually talk about them having lives outside work, and that they're not just human resources in an organization to deliver something, and finding out what they can do and deliver. And I think that's the nice thing in a small agency. If you have 10 or 12 people, a person could design the job to work to their strengths, and they can really enjoy their job and be highly motivated. They don't have to fit into a big machine so much, because you've got 9 other people who may be able to flex around them. Now, you may struggle to get all 10 people happier, but you've got a better chance of that than the large corporate down the
Yeah,
road.
can I just run you back to that thing about people having lives outside so anyone who's worked with me will vouch for the fact that I'm not the best people person, but at least I know it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one step on the way. Doesn't justify the behaviour, but at least I'm aware of it. So I start work at 7 in the morning. People come into the office at 8:30, 9 o'clock. It's Monday morning. They want to talk about their weekends, and I know I meant to say, "Oh, how was your weekend? Oh, amazing! You did this, you did that." But it's like I'm in the middle of doing something. It's like the last thing I want to do is listen to the
Yeah,
fact you took your daughter on a pony and the sun shone and some bees chased you or whatever it was, and I'm meant to be
yeah.
interested. Now I've kind of worked really hard, but I know that experience of, oh, so I'm supposed to be interested in them, am I? It's like, in that case, I'll ask them some questions, but I hope they're quick because I've still got some code I want to write. I mean, how do
Mm-hmm.
you do that being interested in other people thing if if it's not your
If you
natural?
don't really give a
Well,
shit, is what you're basically trying to tell me, is it,
thank
Robert?
you.
Yeah. I really don't give a shit about your life. Just get
No,
in
no,
there
no.
and do some
I'll
work.
pretend to be interested. You've got 5 minutes. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
how do
I
you make
think,
that change? How do you, or maybe you don't. I don't know.
well, what I would do is I would suggest that you get more explicit about when you have what you call your focus time. If you say you're a morning person, your best thing is to get in there between 7 and 9 and get 2 hours of solid, deep thinking coding work done, which you want to be in your deep work zone from Cal Newport. Then you need to say, I'm in this zone until 9 o'clock, and at 10 past 9, I'm coming out and having a cup of tea for a 15-minute break. And you can talk to me all you like about your pony trip and all the rest of it, and I will be interested at that time. But then between 9:15 and 11:15, I'm going to go on back into my office and finish my code off. And you'll be explicit that you want that time uninterrupted and undisturbed to be into that deep work zone, but also make time for the non deep work,
Yeah, I
because
mean,
that is also
in effect, that's what
important.
that's in
You
effect what
can't deep work all the time.
and that's what I learned. What I learned was, Rob's got the headphones on. It wasn't plugged into anything. Rob's got the headphones on. Leave him alone. And then the next stage
Yeah.
was when people come into the office, like at 8:30, just recognise 8:30 till 9 o'clock. You know, get out of your desk, walk around, chat, and you'll actually find it's actually quite interesting if you just get out of your own head. But I do think and maybe it's just back to what you were saying before, which is that we we think we need to be busy and we think we need to look busy and we think what a boss does is wince their eyes, stare at the screen, and swears
Hmm.
and gets bad tempered, which clearly is not necessarily the way of doing it. What about
Mm.
I guess that leads me on naturally to, I mean, do you think there's a difference in leadership styles across the genders? I mean, people say there are. What's your view on that?
I believe there definitely is in most cases. Think we often tend to put it into two buckets. There's a
Mm.
masculine, there's men, and there's women. I think there's a shades of grey in between.
Mm.
Um, and when we come to leadership, there's in gender, there's two things. There's such stereotypes about what is good leadership. And a lot of our models on leadership come from military, and tends to drive into this high driving, high ambitious leader. Going back to looping back to some of the people we were talking about early in this discussion. um, and a socialization which also happens into our society, which is so ingrained. Some of those values is probably as ingrained as the Protestant work ethic, which is around women to be more nurturing and caring and persuading and avoiding direct conflict. So I've worked with it's not necessarily the gender, but I've worked with women who have had a very masculine style, and that is taken more negatively than a man who has a masculine style of leadership. And obviously, vice versa, a man who has a very soft style of leadership is often criticized as which as being more, yeah, as being too weak. So there is a double whammy here between a gender stereotype and a leadership stereotype or
Mm.
value that we have, which makes it extremely complicated to manage. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Right. We're nearly out of time, and I've really enjoyed this
Mm.
meandering conversation we've had. We've kind of
Yes.
covered off lots of.
Not stuck to any of the questions that we agreed
Absolutely.
to.
Well, that's absolutely fine. But I think this is actually far more
That's the
interesting.
fun of it all, isn't it?
I guess my two final questions for you. The first one is just around what are the next. I'll tell you them both so you can think about answers. First one is, what's next for you, Jane? What are the sort of things that you're working on and looking to work on? And the final question is that, what are the things you hear yourself saying time and time again? What are the golden nuggets that you go? And if I were you, if I said that
Mm,
once, I've said it 1,000 times. That'd be really. So what's kind of on the
yeah.
agenda? What's next for Jane?
Yeah. So what's next for me? I'm trying to get to personally the 4-day week as well. At the moment, I've achieved my Fridays, I don't book appointments in, and I use them for more fun things or for doing the deep work. But I haven't quite got to the stage where I'm actually taking a complete holiday on Friday. So that's what I'm working on from my personal goals going forward, and working on a business strategy where as you um, talked about living in Zurich, but most people would have probably picked up if that I'm not
Mm.
originally from Zurich with my Kiwi accent. Hopefully, they call me a Kiwi, not an Aussie. And so I'd like to develop a business model where I'm able to still be doing interesting work, but be able to spend a different, some of my year in New Zealand and some of my year in Switzerland. So that's what I'm working on personally, and from my business goals to try and align my business goals with my personal goals. What do I hear myself telling people again and again? I probably would be is that we don't, I think I said it a million times, I feel like in this one, we don't need to work hard to have good ideas, to be creative, to be brilliant, to do something, but it is so ingrained into us through the values we've had. So really think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Are we doing it just to keep ourselves busy, and really question ourselves on this cult of busyness and the heroes that we worship, and try and carve out time to actually get value adding work done, that the sort of work that can't be taken over by a robot.
I love that. I mean, I've just written it down. We don't need to work hard. Dot dot dot. I mean, I just love it sets off so many triggers in the mind about what
Mm,
you could, should, ought be doing, and then as you quite rightly say, where where do those ideas and notions come from that we think that's how we should be
mm.
behaving? So, if people have not come across the book title is
Yes. Focus in the Age of Distraction, 35 Tips to Focus More and Work Less.
lovely. People need to go out and get hold of that. At the end, there'll be some links and
So
stuff that
yes,
people can find
Amazon
you.
is, yes, find is the easiest place to probably find that, but also on any of the online book places. They're also most welcome to contact me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure you're going to have some links and things at the bottom of the show, so contact me on LinkedIn. It would be the easiest way and place to find me, and I love meeting new people virtually, LinkedIn, or even better in real life as we meet in conferences in Slovenia.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you very much, Jane. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and I look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you very much indeed.